Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Nilima Mehta. Dr. Mehta is a stalwart in the field of child protection and child rights. She has been in the field of child rights, child protection, juvenile justice, foster care, adoption, family counseling, and other community based interventions for more than 30 years now. She has been an honorary consultant with several national organizations such as Childline, CRY, UNICEF, as well as with the state and central government and the Planning Commission for Policy Development, Research, and Review of National Legislations. Dr. Mehta is currently a visiting faculty member at TISS and SNDT in Mumbai. She has presented several national and international conferences and has also represented India as a delegate at Brazil, Korea, Sweden, Denmark, and USA. Dr. Mehta is with us here today, and she is going to be talking about zero tolerance to child sexual abuse, a social legal perspective on child sexual abuse and child protection.
Thank you to the Foundation for providing this platform and opportunity for all of us to be here and interact on this very important issue that touches our head, our heart, and all of the work that we're doing here today. So thank you very much. Creating safe spaces for children. Zero tolerance to child sexual abuse. To every child, a childhood. A childhood that is nurtured, childhood that is nurturing, a childhood that is safe, protected, and enriching so that you can have an adult who's a well functioning individual of society. So, how do we give this child a childhood of this kind? So, we're going to talk about my work and my experiences related to child sexual abuse based on grassroots level work and the convergence of policy development that has happened in these areas, rules, regulations, legislations, programs, and policies in the context of child sexual abuse, as well as grassroots level experiences which are based on my position as Child Welfare Committee chairperson, which is a quasi legal body under the Juvenile Justice Act. It was the first Child Welfare Committee set up in Bombay, and those experiences are woven into three aspects of what I'm going to talk about. The three aspects will be first, analysis of the situation in terms of why and how this is happening, and for us to reflect upon that. The second part focuses on prevention and looking at how we can have the way forward to see how this can be, children can be empowered to not be victims or survivors of child sexual abuse. And the third part looks at interventions, socio, legal, medical, all three interventions together, and whose role and what, and the emerging issues for that. The emerging issues will give us the focus for the way forward, and also to see whether these are gettable goals. These are goals that we would like to work towards, and so many of them are overwhelming, intimidating, and wondering whether society will ever change. So, this is a mixed bag of issues and concerns, and these are the three broad areas of analysis, prevention, and intervention that I'll be talking about. The social fabric of our country is in a state of change, in a flux of challenges that it brings with it. And this brings us to this whole issue of how do we address child sexual abuse. A deep rooted systemic change is what we need. This deep rooted systemic change makes us realize that is it, like Flavia said, increase in the occurrence of child sexual abuse or increase in the reporting of child sexual abuse. So these are some of the aspects that will come to our mind when we look at this, and the analysis is based on case experiences and understanding in the academic world that social construction of childhood, social construction of girlhood is something that we need to look at in the context of patriarchy, in the context of gender violence, and all of that we are doing today. So really the grassroots level reality and the academic analysis really comes together as a convergence which will help us to take the way forward. So when I took of that, these four aspects that I look at is the framework, which is the rights-based framework. I think whatever work we are doing is not that the child has need for protection. The child, it's an entitlement. The child has right to be protected. So within this rights-based framework, it is a finer calibration of various types of abuse, understanding it, and saying even the smallest aspect of abuse is something that we need to flag. I've had experiences starting from a 7-year-old innocently saying, "Why does my grandfather want to smell my undergarments?" You know, a 7-year-old is abused in a way in which she probably doesn't even know what the word abuse meant. Even this good touch, bad touch education has not really happened at that age. And she says, "What? Why does he do this? Is Didi, ये ऐसे क्यों कर रहा है?" And then after that she says, "गंदा लगता है जब whatever. So we are starting with that. Two cases which we've had at the Child Welfare Committee where there has been sexual violence to another level of abuse where there was rupture of the vagina, rupture of the anus, and since for the fear of the medical uh, doctors and the reporting that would happen, they sutured the child in the institution because they were afraid of the consequences of this. And obviously, the child had septicemia and then the child died. So, we're talking about family abuse, we're talking about institutional abuse, we're looking at child sexual abuse in a very broad perspective to say it exists in society at different levels and different levels of the kind of crime. So, POCSO has actually now laid down and calibrated to finer issues about what is penetration, what is sexual harassment, and all of that. So, the 9 sections of POCSO really very clearly enunciate and explain what this is. But as Flavia had also mentioned, and some of my colleagues, that when whether a law is a revolution is an outcome of revolution or is it an outcome of evolution, and when it's an evolution, at least it's well informed process of informed decision making, deliberations, as well as brainstorming, which will look at consequences of what we are demanding. So one of the things that today all of us are faced with is this whole mandatory reporting issue, where on one hand you are bound by this law to report and file an FIR. On the other hand, you have an agreement of confidentiality of privacy, and how are you going to balance this two is some of the major challenges before us. So the second issue is about context setting and understanding the social and relevant social realities and gender based violence that's happening, breaking the silence, the emerging socio-legal issues as a result of that, and finally the child-centric, child-sensitive processes that we need to evolve so that the survival of child sexual abuse has a support mechanism which helps them to reconstruct their life, to be rehabilitated and live a life of emotional security. The preventive aspects looks at the personal safety education programs. Since quote unquote sex education is not permitted in schools in that format, we often refer to it as family life education or what we call personal safety education or a life skills program. So knowledge of sexuality through this life skills program is one of the most important preventive ways to look at it. Helping them to verbalize, children using language and verbalizing fear is something that is very important to explain. Awareness of personal boundaries. What are the personal boundaries as far as your body is concerned, and allowing someone to be intruding on that privacy of yours, and also resulting in assertive communication, to be able to say without the fear of what the consequence would be, because there's a support system that's available. So deconstructing certain myths related to family members cannot do that. I'm sure there's some mistake in what or the child actually dreams of certain things, maybe this is just a figment of the child's imagination, are some of the things we've heard, and we say no. This destructing of myths that a family member cannot do this is a major challenge before us. In institutional abuse, it is the caregiver, and one of the research studies done by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and in some of the focus group discussions that we had done in a home in Bombay where I was part of the Child Welfare Committee, we found 100% sexual abuse of different kind, ranging from child to child, from caregiver to the child, and from superintendents or teachers in the institution. So these are some of the things that are before us that we need to look at. The post-trauma services, victim protection program, the balance between the standard operating procedures as well as the uniqueness of each child, and ensuring that child-centric processes are sensitive and the support system that is available is in the best interest of the child. So this is the context of three areas that I talked about, and this is what we would talk about. So very briefly, what is child protection? Is protection from and against neglect, abuse, violence, and exploitation. Child sexual abuse has an element of all four things, because only when the attention is less and missing that the child would be neglected. Abuse is physical, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse. Violence is domestic violence or violence related to sexuality is also a component, and exploitation in terms of trafficking or for child sexual abuse, trafficking for commercial sex work, all of this is part of the child sexual abuse issue. What is a safe space? The safe space that we are talking about is a place where the child feels secure, protected, nurtured, cared for, and looked after. As I said, this is an entitlement of the child. This is not something that we are giving to the child. It's not a child's need. It's the right of every child to have this kind of protection that we're talking about. The fundamental principles of child protection looks at the rights-based framework, as I just explained, the right to survival, development, protection, and participation. Whenever we say this, we say, okay, this is part of theoretical framework, but this is where all our practice-based thing that comes is really from understanding the ideological framework. So unless we understand the macro level ideological framework from UN conventions to national policies, to the Constitution of India first, then the national policies, state programs, and programs and interventions like the Integrated Child Protection Scheme. So unless we are familiar with all of this whole hierarchical processes, which are hierarchical that seem in nature, but actually they're woven around the same concept of child protection, the best interest of the child being a cardinal principle, at the same time, who interprets what is the best interest of the child? Is it the interest of the organization? Is it the interest of the caregiver? Is it the policy in the best interest of whoever? But where is the child in all of this? So the focus is often on problems, paperwork, processes, procedures, all of it, and somewhere along the child gets lost. So this is something about the best interest of the child, equality and non-discrimination. This is where class-based, gender-based prejudice, bias that is likely to occur. We need to be very, very careful and aware of this, that it doesn't happen. And family and state responsibility. So the continuum begins with the family. That family is the first place for the child's sense of security and bonding and nurturance. And if a family is dysfunctional for whatever reasons, in difficult circumstances, or a child in need of care and protection from a legal framework, then the state takes on the responsibility of the child. So in child sexual abuse, it's really a joint responsibility of society and the family and the legal system and the whole allied system approach that we talk about for child protection. When we look at vulnerability and we do a situation analysis of vulnerability, the vulnerability comes in lots of areas which often we, just brand it as this is a vulnerable child. But the vulnerability is like, suppose you have a 13-year-old tribal girl living in an region which is unreached as far as access to resources are concerned, unreached as far as any policies, programs, support systems are available, then that child is even more subject to violence because of age, gender, caste, class, position, disability, and that child happens to have a child with disability, then poverty, below poverty line families or underreached families, regional differences, and at risk families. This kind of matrix that is there to understand vulnerability brings us through this whole issue of child sexual abuse becoming even more uh, of a challenge when these multiple vulnerabilities exist with children. With this, we bring about a systems analysis. Very often when we say that, it's a multi systems approach, it's an approach which is an integrated, holistic perspective. What are we saying with that? That who should be working with the child as an allied system as well as systems analysis? And this is where we start with the family, society, state, the social and cultural taboos, social and cultural myths within which we are functioning, and where we deny this reality that a family member can do this to a child. Economic issues, health issues, and religious issues. There are religious issues that come also in the way through Devdasi system, or so many of our religious, cultural based issues that emerge for child sexual abuse. So, this is something that we need from a system analysis perspective. Now, when you look at social legal aspects, there are three aspects of POCSO, which is part of the preamble of POCSO, which is the act that we're talking about, the best interest and well being of the child. So, whatever decisions we do, whatever decisions we make and are there is in the well being and best interest of the child, the privacy and confidentiality, and the third is national, bilateral, multilateral measures. So these are the three key issues in the preamble from which emerge some of our socio-legal issues. What is the role of the support professionals? So, who are the support professionals? The helping professionals are everybody in the context of social support, emotional, psychological. So, if you look at the team, it's the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, psychiatric social worker, you have people who are in emotional support, human development people, child development. This becomes the multidisciplinary approach when we look at child protection. So the role, the responsibility and response. Now this has been enunciated in POCSO, but that, to translate an intent into action is a very big challenge before us. So we've had POCSO for over 2 years now, 2012, yeah. And yet today we are wondering, have they been appointed? Are counselors been appointed? Has this happened? And then these are some of the realities that we face, the gap between intent and action. So always the continuum reads like this, that you recognize it, that you report it, you reassure the family and the child that we are there as support to you, rehabilitate and reconstruct the life of a child. So this is the continuum of support professionals or the helping professionals who are there in the areas of child sexual abuse. What is the convergence and dovetailing that is required of this, of relevant legislations? Like if I say now it will be the POCSO, and so we have now a law which is JJ Act and POCSO. We have to read them all together with IPC to bring out this best, what we call justice to the child. So NGOs, the statutory bodies, the three statutory bodies in the context of children are the Child Welfare Committee, the Juvenile Justice Board, and the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. So these are the three statutory bodies that are at this point of time in the context of sexual abuse get involved in the work that is happening. The convergence and dovetailing of work between NGOs, NGO networks, like you have Forum Against Child Sexual Exploitation, you have, that's FACSE, you have organizations who are all represented here, and who are advocacy and awareness organizations also, talking about the awareness generation of this issue, and the medical fraternity who is with us. A lot of forensic psychology information is not available to the support professionals. So and the legal knowledge. So how does this dovetailing and convergence happens between socio, legal, medical fraternity so that we have knowledge of forensic psychology on how we should be reporting, how the examination should be done, and how sometimes the child welfare committee people have a quasi-statutory, they have a statutory position which is quasi-legal, and then are also people who are in the field of, say, for my own experience, our knowledge is in the area of child protection, sociology, social science analysis, and social work, but the legal knowledge has to be, we need support from legal fraternity on this kind of work. So I think this team building or working together as a team becomes a big challenge for all of us. So this brings us to the multi-systems approach. This multi-systems approach is teamwork between the juvenile justice system, between the legal experts, the police, the forensic experts, social workers and counselors, educational institutions and teachers, because even that is very important. The schools bring this empowerment of every child through awareness, knowledge, and understanding of their own anatomy, the body, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, what is privacy, who can touch the body in what parts, and whatever appropriate terms for these language, so that we wouldn't have issues like Flavia said about this particular case. So these are some of the challenges before us. The civil society, which also we need work. So for example, if the foundation has workshops like these, conferences or seminars, it at least generates an awareness in the civil society for such an issue, and it brings it into awareness through the media. So I think this whole multi-system approach is very, very critical for all of us to work together. When we look at intervention strategies, we look at micro to macro level interventions. At the basic grassroots level will be service delivery. At the macro level will be laws, legislations, policies, programs, drafting of this, budget allocation. This morning, I think a major discussion was on allocation of resources. Some of us who are a part of the Planning Commission review of the 11th and the 12th plan document, and the budget allocation having dropped so much, one wonders the kind of priority and how these kind of issues, social issues, would come in the political agenda of a nation. And unless you have it reflected in budget allocations, it's not going to really make an impact unless this kind of corporate social responsibilities, state and legal responsibilities all converge to make this happen. Training, orientation, and capacity building. This is the basic crux of all of us are work doing, because constant upgradation of our knowledge about skills, about attitudes, all of this together is maybe a module that may be there in the colleges of social work, human development, child development. We've done it in for IAS officers, for police officers, for juvenile police units, for so many people. There is a special module on child sexual abuse, and Tulir has done it. Some of the organizations in Bombay, Arpan has been involved. So all these initiatives have to be put together so that we don't reinvent the wheel. We don't need to invent the wheel when there's so much resources available with us, and we can take this forward. So this brings us to collaboration and partnership between organizations, so that there are no parallel initiatives, but they are all converging, dovetailing into the one issue that we're talking about. Lobbying at level, as I said, for budget allocations and programs and policies, and monitoring of all that happens in terms of intent to action, how this process happens. The key concerns and challenges that emerge for us is now what my focus is. Like I said, in terms of intervention and how do we take it forward. So from analysis to prevention, and from prevention to intervention for future action of taking this forward and bringing about doable goals. So social construction of childhood needs to be understood in the Indian context. Very, very importantly, girlhood and childhood. That child is to be seen, not to be heard. Child is the property, quote unquote, of the parents. It's the property of an adult. Child doesn't understand. We know what is best for the child. So this kind of childhood construction that happens leads to a lot of lack of knowledge, awareness about things in life, and the child, whether it's naive or whether it's innocent or whether uninformed, all this leads to issues that we're talking about. Abuse within families, the deconstructing of myths, which says, oh, it cannot happen in a family. We've had so many cases of incest, stepfather, grandfather, all of them looking at children in a way in which it sort of makes you, you know, yeah, it's just I can't I shudder to think of the cases that I have handled where you cannot believe the perversity, the depravity. It's not being judgmental about and giving it a moralistic issue, but to think that a child can be subjected to this kind of abuse is really disturbing. So this deconstructing of myths is absolutely the same way in institutions. The institutional abuse is also so rampant. How do you empower children within institutions to understand each other? What is their form of even quote unquote entertainment or keeping themselves busy, is exploring each other in terms of their bodies and what is happening. So a lot of intervention is required in terms of bothering me so much, I'm sorry. So in terms of interventions where there's a child sensitive approach in all of the work we are doing. Then, okay, on one hand you have a burnout. Everybody who says you try and you can't look after 2 children in a family, look after 100 children and see how it means. Oh, capacity is 100, the actual focus is 400 children. See how it looks. It's good to give a lecture on what's the best interest of the child. You would see the burnout that some of them are. This is not to justify it, but to not to condone what happens, but to understand the social realities in which we are working. The right to privacy and confidentiality, I just explained, diametrically opposite, sometimes conflicting to mandatory reporting. I don't know how to balance this. I'm sure we'll take this forward. I've had counselors who are telling, children in school, please don't share this with me if you won't allow me to report, because otherwise I have to file an FIR as per this. Otherwise, I am subject to prosecution as far as mandatory report. So I've had counselors who said, no. Child sexual abuse cases, at the moment, we don't want to touch. So all of us who've been asking for this, as I said, the law as became a revolutionary this thing or an evolution, and that brings us to amendment in the law that all of us are working towards. So that again, everything is a double-edged sword, and how are we going to address that is the way forward for us. Mandatory reporting ethical issues also that emerge from it. Post-trauma services for the survivor, the victim. This brings us to this whole positive language. The language which is rights-based, a language which is child-sensitive, using words which says a victim of child sexual abuse, survivor of child sexual abuse. What are the words that we are using are very, very important, because it reflects the mindset, it reflects the paradigm shift that is required in thinking as far as this issue is concerned. Then post-trauma services in terms of counseling, support mechanisms are all on paper. Thank you. Are all on paper, and we need to translate this into action. So victim protection programs are also part of the POCSO, and this is what needs to become a reality. The culture of silence, as we talked about this morning, the culture of silence needs to break. That, oh, you can't talk about it, this is something which is a private matter, this is something which will result in social stigma, in family trauma. So all these traumatic experiences are sort of suppressed in the name of social implications. Perpetrator prosecution, there's a lot of things that Flavia talked about. Implementation and standard operating procedures. Recognizing the uniqueness of each case, at the same time having a systems-based approach where there is a systematic standard operating procedures so that we do the right thing at every case, and then we are not told that, oh, this is what you should have done. We were inventing the wheel when we started the Child Welfare Committee. Oh, the child has to depose over there, but the recording is in front of you, and I'm saying we don't even know how and what words are appropriate to write this kind of report. So consolidating efforts of services providers and medical fraternity, child-centric sensitive approach to all of this. So just to conclude, I'd like to say that we often say, can somebody do something for this child? And yes, everybody can do something for this child. Yes, anybody can do something, but nobody becomes that somebody. So why not that somebody be me? That somebody, be me, is the beginning of a process that the foundation has provided this platform for all of us to work together. So let us commit ourselves to zero tolerance, a non-negotiable. This is an absolute non-negotiable and zero tolerance to any form of child sexual abuse or any form of child abuse, period, and create a safe and social reality and environment for the child through affirmation and empowerment of the child. Thank you. If there are any comments, questions, please feel free to. Yes.
I'd like to ask you about the very fact that POXO has, I mean, there is justice, and legal justice is one aspect of it. But POXO does have these various actors involved, and whether we as NGOs can kickstart them into doing something about, like, the SJPU,
Yes.
and then you have the DCPU, which is supposed to maintain a list of special educators and
right.
other support persons. So is there any kind of roadmap you would give all of us as to what each of these actors can do and how we should get
Yeah.
them, or what we should expect of them?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Should I respond to that and wait for? Yeah. See, one of the things the initiative at Maharashtra government has happened is a small resource group has been formed, which is looking at doing exactly what this to converge the integrated child protection scheme, which has the district child protection units, and under POXO you have the support. So, how do you converge the services of both this and counselors at every level? So a group has drafted what are called the guidelines for POXO. So within those guidelines, you have the role of who's a counselor, who's a support person, who has to do what at which stage, pre-trial stage, post-trial stage, reporting of the crime, then what happens to the perpetrator. All of these have been put down as guidelines and have been submitted to the Ministry of Women and Child Development. So some of us have worked on it both at the ministry level. Being a concurrent subject, the state can also, not can, but also has the power to make their own guidelines. So initiation with the state machinery is what has happened here in Maharashtra and in many of the states for guidelines on POXO. I don't know if that responds. Yeah, we can share that then. Yes. Yeah.
Ma'am?
Sorry.
Ma'am, see, I've worked with quite a few hostels and orphanages for boys. Could you just give me a few examples where they have... my name is Taha. I work with an organization called Hamara Footpath. And we have worked with a lot of boys' hostels and orphanages. Can you highlight any examples where they have
Yes.
successfully implemented, like you mentioned about institutional,
Yeah.
with the boys and the boys themselves, not with the
Right.
caretakers?
That's right.
Yeah.
See, one of the most important things is that we believe in one of this demystifying myths that sexual abuse happens only to girls and not to boys. So I think one of the major thing is when we do awareness programs to demystify this fact that even boys explore as in just as an attempt to explore each other's body would do that. So we've had acute cases of just older boys with younger boys in the process of exploring have actually had sodomization that has happened and ruptured parts of their body and have gone through acute septicemia and illnesses as a result of this and resulting in death. So I think in the boys homes, or as they call children's home for boys, there's a lot of discussion on how to channelize their energy into more creative things, physical energy, through dance, through drama, through music, through physical activity, through judo, through whatever thing that releases their energy, physical energy. This may seem like, I mean, how is that connected to that? But when their energies are released and are done, they are far more calmer as far as this. Even meditation, not in the technical sense, but quiet time. A lot of quiet time has helped boys to sit and think about what their life is and how they'll address. Plus, like I said, education, which is personal safety education about what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. In the earlier language, it used to be called the good touch and the bad touch. All of this is discussed with boys and awareness programs are organized by so many civil society organizations who are here today and the networks working for child sexual abuse. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm Navina. May I?
Sorry, yeah, I couldn't see which side. Wish there was light in the auditorium. Yeah, I can't see your face. Yeah, tell me, Lorna.
I'm Navina. I want to know that as a parent, if I come across child sexual abuse, what is the starting point? Where can you seek help from?
As a parent, the first one is child sexual awareness. First, it would begin with awareness and understanding of what it means and whatever. So, if there has been a reporting or of some kind that is there, the first thing is to really listen to the child, to recognize it if the child is not articulate. So, children need words and articulation to explain what has happened without reliving the trauma. See, like you said, every time you ask the child again and again, the child is actually reliving the trauma. The child is also a fear of the consequences because the child has been threatened by a lot of people who have been abusers. If you see this is what will happen to your family, to this, to that, to even to the level of death. So these children are morbid fear of sharing. So telling the child that it's okay to share, plus non-verbal communication. So as a parent, it's very important to recognize non-verbal communication of a child who is withdrawn, the child who becomes quiet, the child becomes extra aggressive, or whatever. So these are some of the things to be aware of. And then, of course, to seek a counselor. Seeking a counselor is most important to first understand how do I handle this in a sensitive manner where there'll not be just alarm. At the same time, there will be understanding about the way it is. So I think so professional help from a support system is the first way, best way to go forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
My name is Parul and I'm from Gujarat, Saishav. I have one thing to share. I think that our experience of working with children, we find that the children are the best resource. Usually we treat children only as an object or as a victim, but if we can start looking at the children as a resource, they can provide excellent support to their peers. And I think that is one very, very effective strategy which we often tend to forget. Second thing, I want to have a question like, as an organization, sometimes what is very difficult for us is to create kind of a monitoring and evaluation system around child protection. Particularly when we are working in the prevention of child protection, because if there is any case, for example, if we are running Childline and if a case is reported and we have resolved the case, that is something that is easy to handle. But we are doing so many other prevention part of it, which is really kind of difficult to put it in the framework of monitoring and evaluation. Sure. So I think if you can give us some tips about that.
So two things. First one, I couldn't agree more with you that children with each other could be really good support system. But after knowing that the knowledge that is shared by them is out of a personal empowered knowledge with affirmations about whatever they've gone through is not something to be stigmatized or afraid about. But so this personal education program is very, very important, the child education. Then they can be support to one another. So I couldn't agree more with that. The second part is monitoring and evaluation. Yes, this is where we talk about continue, where I would go one step further is implementation. So at implementation level, what happens, monitoring and evaluation, we do not have a systemic inbuilt systems which are there. It's provided in paper. So some of our laws are excellent laws when it comes to being on paper, but when it comes to translating them into the operationalization aspect, the monitoring evaluation becomes a big issue, and then that is a big challenge. So we have, criteria, some checklist that is available with institutions as well as schools that we work with, that there is a checklist to say that, okay, this is the way to monitor it, this is the way to do it with schools, teachers, principal, where we do a teacher education program, a teacher sharing program. So it's not empowerment through knowledge is the best way to ensure evaluation. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Parul. I'm a counselor and I'm right now working as a child therapist in one of the orphanage. you just touched the point that in the institution it is high level of exploration, physical exploration, sexual exploration. I just want to know how to break that vicious cycle, because I try hard to do that, and as you said, there are 300, 400 kids. So I just want to know something.
I think we do it at 3 levels. The first level is at the level of caretakers or caregivers, as we say, to explain to them that the way to do it is not to punish the child. I had one case in which a mother who saw this, that her son with 2 other boys was exploring their bodies and doing something that she thought was, of course, wrong and morally wrong and whatever physically. She actually took 2 ladles on a tawa and burnt his 2 bottoms. This boy was in the home, and and he wouldn't sit. He would sit on one leg and then he would sit on the other. He wouldn't sit first and foremost, and when he had insisted that, please, I don't want you to stand, please sit, and he wouldn't do that, then something, how your intuitive awareness sort of tells you that there's something not right about it. So one of our probation officers, we told him that please go and take him to the a place and then see what is in his body that is bothering him. And you won't believe it, he had the worst burnt wounds from 2 ladles from which were heated on a tawa and put on his bottom. And yet this child said, don't punish my mother, she did it to correct me. She said it's not her fault. Now this child wants to go back home even though he's been separated from the mom for doing this kind of abuse on her own son and things like that. This child keeps saying, forgive her, it's not her fault, please don't punish her, I want to go back to her. So this brings us to this whole child's right to a family, and how do you balance this whole situation of the mother and father. So in this, what we do is caretaker awareness and training education program and knowledge empowerment. The second level is older boys who almost become the bullies. Yeah, so the next line of control and power is with the older boys. So the older boys are explained to about how they do whatever it is, and not to exploit the younger children, and the younger children about being bullied and what it means and how do you say no. But it's a big challenge, and I can say that I've not been too successful in doing this, because the moment you report, you have a double, coming back with a force that boomerangs back at you and say, you complain, you wait and see now. So we are working against the psyche of human beings, which is so retaliating and which is so negative in that sense of revenge and, pain, inflicting pain on someone. Anyway, I think I heard the bell, and thank you very much for this opportunity to the
Can I share something? Just a quick.
whatever the organizers. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Maya Kriplani. I'm a consulting psychologist at Jasloke Hospital. I was just called into memory about 20 years back when this young lady said about what can we do as parents to address a situation. And I remember an example about 20 years back when a 3-year-old girl was being sexually abused. And this came out in the session, and I even spoke to the mother about it. And I asked her, I said, what's happening? I mean, do you know about this happening? And she said, no. But she was not willing to confront the person or even tell her husband about it, because the person who was molesting this little 3-year-old daughter of theirs was an income tax consultant, their income tax consultant. Now, can you imagine this? Because my reaction to this was, as a person, as a therapist, I had to control my emotions. But at the same time, I told her, I said, see, if you don't bring this to the realization of your husband and you don't do this, you are going to lose your daughter for life. How is she going to deal with life later on? And my concern here is, how much as a parent are we going to take that courage within us to stop this abuse? Zero tolerance to whoever is abusing your daughter or son. We must first inspire that courage and ask ourselves within us, are we going to stop this? We can have a lot of sessions on this, but we as individuals have to have the courage to combat with this,
Thank you.
torture which is happening.
Thank you, Maya,
Thank
for
you
sharing.
so much.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to conclude by saying that it's a balance between courage and sensitivity. It's a balance between empowerment of how we can handle it later. So it's not to be a bull in a china shop and sort of confront it without having the mechanisms or the know-how or the hand-holding of the support mechanisms that's required. So I think all of us here can provide that hand-holding and support to take this forward. Thank you.